Hi, I'm Dr. John Hatch here at the Brain Rehab channel, and what I'm talking about today is a common symptom that we hear of land sickness, or after you get off of a boat and you feel like you're still rocking and still moving. Sometimes it's after a flight, sometimes it's after in a car, and it's a post-movement motion sickness called mal-debarkment syndrome, or MdDS. And I know there's not too much literature on it, and there's a lot of people doing some incredible things, but I want to break it down more specifically to the neurology of what is occurring and what we're seeing in the clinic, and the results that we're getting are phenomenal. So let me show you how this all works. So when you have any type of motion sickness of any type, the brain stem and the back part of the brain stem, called the cerebellum. This cerebellum regulates everything. With most dizziness, most people's dizziness can be caused in two simple things. Yes, there's hosts of issues, right? We're talking about vertigo, we're talking about dizziness, it could be blood sugars issues, it could be vestibular, it could be BPPV. This is specific to mal-debarkment syndrome, so let's focus on that. So the way the brain system works is you have inside your inner ear, so you have your ear and you have your canal, and then inside the ear you have your bones that attach to the cochlear nerve, which is your sound, and then you have your vestibular system, which has 3 canals on it and an otolithic system inside this intervestibular system compartment, and it's called the saccule and the utricle. Now what's really important about that is the canals are for any type of rotation, so spinning, rotation, and the otolithic system, the saccule and the utricle, these systems do with different types of translation, linear translation, whether that be up and down, forward and back, laterality. These translations are constant. Because they're constant, they have a huge effect on the brain. Even while you're sleeping, the vestibular system is giving constant input to the brain. A lot of people with sleep issues, and even when you're trying to not move and there's no more movement, because gravity's still working on your system, you're still getting feedback into the system. So when you take these two nerves, called the vestibular cochlear nerve, so when the vestibular nerve and the cochlear nerve come together and they create the vestibular cochlear nerve, cranial nerve 8, they send signals to this vestibular nucleus. And this is inside your brainstem, inside the pons where your rest and digest is. Now this is really important because the vestibular system's nucleus sends a large amount of input into the cerebellum. So these receptors inside the saccule and the utricle are hitting a certain activation, sending signals to it, and then the cerebellum has to regulate it. This is the regulatory part of the brain. Remember, 69 billion neurons are in your cerebellum, but in your upper cortex, your entire cerebrum, your brain, we're only talking 19 billion. So there's almost 3 times the amount of neurons in this little cerebellum that regulates balance and system. Now, because these are constant, you're always fighting gravity, you're always against it. So after all that movement and that adaptation, then you're on steady ground, but that receptor gets activated or hangs, and that cerebellum can't regulate it. You gotta stabilize it. And usually, if both sides are damaged, you really don't notice too much. But if one side of the system is off, you're going to have a larger motion detection, a larger input to the brain, because every time you move and activate, when I activate the left side, it has to inhibit the right side. And when I activate the right, I have to inhibit the left. But if these aren't working in harmony, then you're going to get an overexcitation on one and a deactivation on the other. So how does this affect mal-debarkment syndrome or people with motion sickness? What we're finding a lot is how this is regulated through the cerebellum. And then you have people who I've seen patients all over the world with this syndrome, and they'll say, I'm not sure if it's stress related, I'm not sure if it's hormonal related, I'm not sure if it's neurological related. What is causing it, and why does stress induce it? Well, the cerebellum, 20% of its function is with motor. 80% is with planning, emotion, and thinking. So stress can induce an imbalance in this system. And when you're looking at it, you have to understand, one, you have to have a quantitative way to measure this vestibular system specifically, which we use a CAPS unit, and other systems to test balance and posture, as well as looking at the ocular system, because every time you tilt your head, you activate this otolithic system and the canals, and the eyes have a torsional reaction to it. And you can't always see that on a headset or a V&G headset, but you can do it with direct eye tests and light reflexes and looking at how the eyes tilt and react inside as you look through the pupil. So when you're looking at maldebarkment syndrome, what you're really trying to find is what isn't regulated, or what receptor is too high. And that's what I want you to focus on. If a fastball is coming into the brain at 90 miles an hour, your cerebellum better be able to catch at 90 miles per hour. But if it can only handle a 70 miles per hour, it's going to feel off and disconnect. And if it's on one side more than the other, we see these in major chronic maldebarkment syndrome, land sickness, motion sickness. And when you regulate this cerebellum and stabilize this system, it changes. And once it wires, and if you can hardwire that for 3 months, you don't worry about it happening again and again. I hope you enjoyed this message. And look, if you're suffering from this, what is going on with your vestibular system, and how is your cerebellum regulating it? And those you go to see, how do they measure it and how do they treat it? And it'll make all the difference for you and your symptom.